I like you.
No homo.
Game over, they ain't no when you HOs on my petty shit, but I don't paint toes.
Avengers Infinity War is goated and better than Endgame. That's the video. Thanks for watching. But seriously, I want to wind the clock back to 2018. Infinity War just hit theaters, half of the MCU got snapped away, and thick Thanos memes are everywhere.
Damn, boy, he's thick!
I loved the movie and thought it was one of the best comic book films up until that point. As a matter of fact, I still feel that way. And just like everybody else, I was anxious to see the conclusion in 2019, Avengers Endgame. Fast forward a year, it releases, and I had some fun with it. There are definitely some parts that I liked, but I found it to be a severe drop in quality when compared to Infinity War. And though I thought the ending was epic, and it was great seeing all the MCU heroes and characters on screen at once, but as time went on and it was all over, and the shock and awe kind of wore off, I found that I didn't really enjoy a large portion of the film, outside of the amazing awe moments. And in the years since, upon rewatches, I found myself enjoying it less and less. Once you're removed from how big of an event it was at the time, and when you start comparing it to the film that preceded it, its flaws start to become more obvious. Now, I'm not saying Endgame is a terrible movie. In fact, it's still far superior than many others in the MCU. But what I wanted to do was take a look back at both Infinity War and Endgame, and explain why I think one works really well, and why the other doesn't, at least for me personally. And while I'm at it, I'll also be pointing out some of the flaws that Infinity War has. There aren't many, but I figure I might as well mention them anyway. So sit back, relax, and let's get into it. So I was trying to think of a few things that Infinity War does that makes it great. Of course, there's the standard stuff that everyone else says. The action is great. It's cool seeing all the heroes on screen. The movie has some epic moments, and it has the best version of Thor in the MCU. But when you compare it to Endgame, that movie has all that too, except for Thor, but we'll get there. And arguably, it has some bigger and more epic moments. So instead, I boiled it down to just a few things that are what I think makes this movie work so well. Number one, the momentum. Before even the title sequence, the movie starts setting everything into motion by introducing Thanos and the Infinity Stones. Within 30 minutes, we have multiple storylines following different groups of characters, and then the story and plot progression just doesn't stop. From the jump, it just goes, constantly keeping you engaged while always having something happen that either adds to or furthers the overall plot, which is stopping Thanos and trying to keep the stones away from him. So to me, and most others I assume, it keeps you hooked and keeps things in motion, and there's never a dull moment. And since everything is so urgent, you actually feel the stakes and the weight of the situation. And really all the heroes sharing the screen time and the awesome action sequences are just the icing on the cake. Overall, it just feels like a thrill ride that doesn't let up. This also ties into the pacing because this movie is 2.5 hours long, but yet at no point do I feel like it drags. There's also a lot going on, but it doesn't ever feel cluttered. It very plainly explains to you the situation and then just starts going from there. It doesn't stop and keeps you hooked the whole time. So yeah, that's the first thing I think it does very well, which is technically, I guess, 3 things. You have a constantly engaging story that has excellent pacing and keeps the stakes very high with multiple groups of characters. And now number 2 is the antagonist. This ties into the last point because without a good threat for them to combat against, then it's all just wasted. You would have the heroes in a story with a lot of agency and momentum with very high stakes, but you wouldn't really care because you couldn't buy the threat that they were up against, therefore making you not care that much. The MCU spent years building Thanos up, and a lot was riding on him because if he wasn't good, or wasn't seen as at least a formidable foe to the Avengers, then it would severely affected the quality of the film. Luckily for us, he turned out to be the best villain in the MCU, and he's great for the reasons that everyone has already said before. He has a clear goal that you can understand. He has an interesting motivation, and is certain that what he is doing is right. He's not only smart, but he's a strong physical threat against every single one of the heroes. And of course, he's expertly acted by Josh Brolin. But another thing to add that I think is important is that he's an ever-present threat that isn't just looming in the background. He doesn't waste time and just gets shit done. Before the title screen starts, he takes out Hulk, Thor, Loki, Heimdall, and the Asgardians, and has 2 out of the 6 Infinity Stones. He then tells his children to go to Earth to get the other stones, and 10 minutes later, they're on Earth trying to get the stones. Then 45 minutes in, he's facing off against the Guardians of the Galaxy, and snatches another stone and takes Gamora to lead him to the Soul Stone. You see what I'm saying? He's an ever-present threat that doesn't fuck around. Basically, Thanos is about that action. He's really the central focus of the movie and the driving force. His actions are what causes the heroes to act, so he's constantly moving the story along. And it's his presence, goal, motivation, and actions that keeps the entire movie engaging. So when you break it down, Thanos really is the driving force of the entire movie, that gives the film urgency, that gives the film stakes, that keeps the heroes busy, and keeps everything moving along from moment to moment. And it works extremely well. And it's these 2 factors I think really elevate this movie, and why I think it works really well. Now before I move on to Endgame, I'll go ahead and address a few of the issues that I have with Infinity War. There aren't many, so this won't take long. First off, the humor. I've made it no secret that I don't care for the MCU's quippy dialogue and humor, a byproduct of Joss Whedon's Avengers movies. And Infinity War also suffers from this, although to a much lesser degree than many other MCU movies like Civil War. Like when it wants to be serious, it's serious, but it still has its moments. Like here, Tony is learning about the Infinity Stones and Thanos, and then they stop to have a 10-second joke about fucking ice cream.
And I swore off dairy. Then Ben & Jerry's named a flavor after me, so...
Stark raving hazelnuts.
Not bad.
A bit chalky.
A hunk of burning fudge is our favorite.
That's a thing?
Whatever, point is...
Some jokes just kind of mess with the flow of some scenes. Ironically, if you remove some of these jokes, the scenes still work fine. I feel like they put them in just to get a cheap laugh out of the audience, and to make sure things don't get too serious, you know? Or maybe they throw them in just to spice up the conversation or something. To add to this theory, there's that famous scene where Peter and Tony are talking to each other, and Peter says some pretty heavy stuff, but then there's an obvious reshoot where they kind of throw in a little joke to spice it up a little bit. And you can tell it's a reshoot because, you know, his hair is completely fucking different. Kind of makes you go like, why was that necessary? Overall, the quippy dialogue isn't as annoying here as it is in many other MCU movies, and this film is great in many other aspects, so I just kind of look past it. And the only other two issues I found are the same ones that everyone else has. Some scenes, not all, have this gray filter over them that the MCU likes to use. I never really understood why they do this. I guess to give these films like a similar look and feel. I'm not too sure. But in the scenes that they do use it, I think it's pretty ugly, and I'm thankful that they're slowly moving away from it. I think they use it less here than they do in Civil War, so it's not nearly as big of an eyesore, so that's good. And the second thing is the CGI body with the floating heads. Yeah, just like Civil War, it's here, and it can look a little goofy. The CGI in general can look a little meh at times, but overall it is really great. And on characters like Thanos, it is completely perfect the whole time. There's just a few things like Iron Man and Spider-Man's suits not looking as polished in some scenes as they do in others, but overall the CGI is good. It just has its moments. Okay, there's just one more little thing that I want to complain about that really annoys me, and this movie does it a lot. It's a small thing and most people really wouldn't care, but it's something I've been seeing in movies for years, and it bugs me because so many films do it, and that's this fucking lens flare effect. It started to get popular because Michael Bay and J.J. Abrams use it a lot, and now for nearly a decade, many other films have been doing it too. And yeah, it's a pretty neat effect, and it can look pretty cool, but I'm personally just tired of seeing it. And usually I wouldn't complain about that much, but Infinity War does it quite a lot, and I just wanted to mention it. It's a personal thing that I'm not the biggest fan of, and it doesn't hurt the quality of the movie overall, but I still just wanted to mention it. Okay, to quickly recap, the things that make Infinity War great are its engaging story that doesn't lose momentum at all and has excellent pacing, and Thanos being a great villain that acts as a driving force for the entire movie that keeps everything going and in motion. Now let's go ahead and hop over to Endgame and talk about how it's lacking these two components.
I bust the fat ass nut. But I'll stop the fuck out your bitch ass. I'm not fucking playing with you.
So we established what Infinity War has that Endgame doesn't. Now let me break down how and why it's missing these things. There's also a few other issues that I have, but we'll get to that stuff later. For now, let's focus on the two components that are missing, the momentum and antagonist. And just like Infinity War, these two are tied pretty closely together. Let me explain. So Endgame starts off not long after Infinity War, and within 10 minutes, Thanos is killed, and then there's a time skip. Then everything starts to move by slowly. There's no urgency, nothing really moves the story along, and there are parts that really just drag. And I feel this is due to the fact that there is no Thanos for majority of the movie. There's nothing that really pushes the heroes to solve the issue right now. There's no race to beat the clock, and since there's no Thanos, there's no driving force to make the heroes act, and the pacing suffers for it. For comparison, Endgame is right around 3 hours long. Infinity War is 2.5 hours long. Both longer than your average movie, but Endgame feels so much longer. And I think that's due to the fact that for majority of the runtime, there's no real threat or force that really moves the story along. There isn't a Thanos, and when we finally get one in the third act, he isn't even the same Thanos. And I don't mean that literally because, yes, this is a different Thanos from a different timeline, but I mean is, he doesn't act the same. In Infinity War, he was all about that action and was constantly doing shit. But here, he just pulls up to the Avengers compound and just sits there and waits while Nebula brings him the gauntlet. Like, fucking why? In the movie, he learned that his plan worked and that there are people trying to undo it. You figure he would show just a bit more urgency now that he's there to ensure that his plan stays a success. But no, he just sits outside and waits. Now, I figured that Endgame was going to have some slower moments because we saw at the end of Infinity War that Thanos just escaped from everybody. So I figured for a little while, he wasn't going to be involved and they were going to be actively looking for him. But by taking Thanos out, they basically killed the biggest driving force of the last movie, and here he is never replaced with anything similar, at least similar in the terms of something that constantly keeps the story moving forward, like in Infinity War, which causes a large portion of the movie to feel slow, sluggish, and dragged out. It really shows you how something as simple as pacing and having a central threat to keep the plot progressing can affect the movie, because for me, I found myself not invested throughout the entire thing, like I was in Infinity War, until the climax happened, and we get all the cool epic stuff. And I feel like a lot of people overlooked this on the first viewing because throughout the whole time travel shenanigans, many people were having a lot lot of fun revisiting a bunch of events from previous movies. I mean, I like some of that stuff too, I thought it was alright, but upon rewatches, you start to notice how long this section really is. And once that nostalgic feeling is gone, then you start to really notice the issues on the pacing and how slow and sluggish this whole section is. At least until things start to pick up during the climax. Which reminds me, during the climax, there's one flaw with it that has always annoyed me, and it could literally be fixed if they just changed the order of events. So, Hulk snaps everyone back, and then Thanos blows up the building. Then Nebula is going after the gauntlet for Thanos, while Thanos waits outside and then eventually starts fighting Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America. I think all they had to do to make this moment more intense was to have Thanos blow the building up before Hulk snaps everybody back. That way you can feel like there are real stakes here, because throughout this whole sequence, I was just waiting for everybody else to show up, because I saw Hulk snap everybody back. So it was really just a matter of time before they showed up. I just think by having the building blow up before everyone got snapped back, it would make everyone looking for the gauntlet in the rubble and the fight against Thanos more intense. And then at the last moment, you can have Hulk snap everybody back, they show up, and then there's a giant showdown. This could have definitely raised the stakes, because I didn't feel like there was much during this section, because I saw Hulk snap everyone back. So me as a viewer, I was just waiting for the team to show up. So the struggle for the gauntlet really didn't interest me that much, because I was just thinking, you got what you wanted. You snapped everybody back. I'm pretty certain most people just probably wouldn't care, but it's a small little thing that always bugged me. I think Endgame is a good example of how a movie can feel long when you just remove one or two things. In this case, that's the story having momentum and a threat that constantly keeps the movie engaging, so that the pacing doesn't get bogged down. For example, if you compare it to Zack Snyder's Justice League, despite the fact that the Snyder Cut is an hour longer than Endgame, it goes by much faster. And that's due to having a central threat that keeps the story moving forward, so the pacing never feels slow or sluggish. I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but that's how I feel. So now we talked about the two things that Endgame is missing that doesn't make it work nearly as well as Infinity War. Now it's time to talk about the few other things that annoy me about the movie. Okay, so the first thing is the time travel stuff. I already mentioned earlier that when you first watch it, it is really cool visiting all these other events from previous MCU movies. But once you go back to rewatch it, you realize all this time travel stuff is actually the slowest part of the entire movie. Or at least it's not as interesting the second time around. But of course, the biggest problem with the time travel is that they establish the rules of time travel and then they go ahead and ignore it later on. To break it down, basically when you go back in time and change something, it creates an alternate timeline or an alternate universe. So it doesn't actually affect your current universe. This is all well and fine, but then at the very end of the movie, they just kind of chuck this out the window. That of course happens when Captain America goes back in time to return all the stones, but then he doesn't come back, and instead he's seen as an old man sitting at the bench nearby. And that's because he went back in time and stayed there instead of coming back through the machine. So of course if you were paying attention, this shouldn't be possible, because if he went back in time, he would exist in a different universe. So he would have grown up to be an old man in a different timeline, not the one that he came from. Also, you got Thanos and his army coming from 2014 to the main timeline now. So does that mean there's an alternate timeline where there just is no Thanos? So there's a timeline where the events didn't happen in Infinity War? Also, I think it's interesting that the Ancient One tells Hulk that he can't remove the stones from different points of time because it'll mess up that timeline's reality. And it got me thinking, so when Thanos destroyed all the stones at the beginning of this film, why is it that reality is fine? Like they cease to exist now? Is it because these stones existed in the past in this timeline, so it's okay that they don't exist anymore? I don't know. Time travel always like convolutes things in movies. Then of course there's the 5-year time skip, where some pretty important things happen that we the viewer don't really get to see. Of course you got Hawkeye turning into Ronin and just slaughtering criminals, being at his absolute lowest point after losing his family. Of course we don't really see any of that, we just see a glimpse of it before he's pulled back into heroism by Black Widow. Then of course we got Professor Hulk. And this is Banner and Hulk as one working together. And all this happens off screen. I think this one rubs a lot of people the wrong way because they really don't know what to do with the Hulk in the MCU. So they kind of had him repeat the same story arc like 2 times. You had the Incredible Hulk, where at the very end it's implied that Bruce Banner is able to control the Hulk now. But then in his next appearance in the Avengers, he doesn't have the Hulk under control anymore. But then by the end of that film, it's also implied that he has the Hulk under control again with his "I'm always angry" line. But then in Age of Ultron, he can't control the Hulk anymore. And then finally in Endgame, there's a time skip, and now him and Hulk are just cool now. I don't hate the idea of Professor Hulk. I just think it's a little bit annoying watching them repeat almost the same story arc twice with him, just for them to finally resolve it and move past it off screen. And of course, this now brings me to Thor. So yeah, he went through a very drastic change, and he's as down in the dumps at his absolute lowest point, and so he also gained a bunch of weight and lost a bunch of his strength, which kind of confused a lot of people because if you look at where he was at the end of Infinity War and at the beginning of Endgame, you figure that it would make more sense that he became a protector of his people, instead of basically not caring at all. You figure that all the tragedy that he went through would empower him, but instead he's worse off here than he ever was. Yeah, I get that he's sad and depressed, but given how we saw Thor in the last movie, I really don't think that would stop him from doing what's right for his people. So I'm gonna tell you like the real reason why they made Thor like this. It's because they needed to nerf him. Because at the end of Infinity War, he was able to take out Thanos when he had all 6 stones. Because he essentially leveled up when he acquired Stormbreaker. So I feel like the Russos needed a way to nerf him, so they basically made him overweight, sad, depressed, and out of practice for 5 years. Because realistically, Thor with Stormbreaker at the end of Infinity War would easily just solo 2014 Thanos with no stones. It was also kind of annoying that Thor just kind of felt like a joke the entire time, with him being the butt of a few jokes throughout the whole movie. And there was one little small thing that actually annoyed me, and that was the fact that Tony Stark figured out time travel in like one night. Now, Tony Stark is an engineer, and I always felt like the MCU has made him smarter than he actually was, but here it was just really annoying because he explicitly says that this isn't his field of expertise, but then as soon as he sits down and thinks about it, he just figures it out. It was a small thing, but when it happened, I just rolled my eyes. And of course, there are a few other issues that carry over from Infinity War. You have that MCU gray filter over a lot of scenes, and you have the CGI body and weird floating head thing again. The Russos filmed both these films back to back, so I'm not surprised that it shares some of those same issues from Infinity War. But these two things aren't nearly as annoying as all the other stuff we just went over. So yeah, I think that about covers it. That's why I think Infinity War works so much better than Endgame, and why I greatly prefer one over the other. And like I already said, I don't hate Endgame, I just feel like it's lacking in several departments, and because of that, it really dampers the experience for me personally, especially after the hype is over, and you step back and start critically looking at the movie. But it still has some very epic and memorable moments, and at times it is really awesome. I just feel like by lacking a central threat and really good engagement, it causes the movie to be really sluggish, and just feel like an absolute drag at times. But of course, that's just my opinion, so don't you go ahead and leave a comment, let me know, which one do you prefer, Infinity War or Endgame? And of course, I'm gonna give a nice big shout out to the channel members. I love you guys 3,000. If you're interested in becoming a channel member, click the join button down below, check out the perks. If they interest you, consider joining, or not, it don't matter.
None of this matters.
Walter, put your dick away, Walter.
Are you serious right now?
I'm not having sex with you right now, Walter.